O'Connell is an internationally recognized health and medical writer, consultant, and lecturer on addiction. He has created courses on addiction at Cape Cod Community College and writes the popular Cape Cod Times advice column on addiction. He is also the author of the booklet, Up in Smoke, and the book, Addicted, A Guide to Understanding Addiction. Now, Tom O'Connell.
Hi, welcome to Understanding Addiction. Addiction, I always want to emphasize that it's a very complicated subject. It's a subject that involves the whole being. It's a subject that involves love objects. It's a subject that involves desire. And in order to show how complicated it is, I want to give you a little illustration now of the many kinds of addictions that there are. And I think we can be addicted to just about anything. But it happens that alcohol is one of the most deadly and dangerous addictions known to mankind. And so we're going to focus today on alcohol addiction. Alcohol addiction. When did it all begin? I think it goes back to the beginning of the human race. I have a friend that thinks that the apple in the Garden of Eden was actually a grape, and maybe it was fermented, and maybe that's where a lot of the trouble began. This same friend, who's a pioneer in the field of alcoholism named Mark Keller, calls alcohol the Delilah of drugs. Delilah took away Samson's power, and so does alcohol take away the power of people when we become addicted to it. And Noah, right after the flood, what was the first thing Noah did? He planted a grapevine. And the next thing his son found him naked and drunk. So we've had trouble with alcohol from the beginning of time. 4,000 years ago in Babylon, they were trying to regulate taverns. In ancient Egypt, they had laws and trouble with beer and wine. In China, there was one time when they wanted to behead people who were drinking liquor. In Rome, men under age 30 were forbidden to have alcohol. And women, for their lifetime, were forbidden to have alcohol. Why? Because of the trouble that a lot of people got into throughout the history of the human race by using alcohol. Many, many taboos about alcohol in the Bible, but also the notion that alcohol itself is not evil. It's how we use it. In the founding of this country, it's sort of amazing that one of the reasons we're here is the Pilgrims were running out of beer. The people coming across the ocean were running out of beer, and that's why they didn't end up in Virginia. They stopped at Provincetown and in Plymouth. And in colonial times, they used to fine drunks and they used to punish drunks, and up until very recently, this is what has been happening. They considered it a sin. And today we're trying to get away from the notion of alcoholism being a sin. We're thinking of it more as a disease process. And we've had a lot of struggles to do with alcoholism. We had temperance movements and we had prohibition earlier in this century. And now what we have is freedom to make a choice. And that's what confuses a lot of people. We do have the freedom to drink or not to drink. Today in America, in the United States of America, we have some statistics for you to look at now. This is to do with drugs and alcohol and tobacco. The alcohol problem in America involves, on a given day, today in the United States, for example, we'll have about 20 deaths due to drugs. We'll have 350 due to alcohol. If you take that 350 deaths due to alcohol today, you're talking about 100,000 people this year will die of alcohol-related situations. We've never had a war, I believe. I don't believe we've had wars that cause this much devastation to the human being. We're not talking about the injuries and the disabilities. If we talk about, no one knows how many injuries and disabilities there are from alcoholism. So it is a problem. 1 out of 4 homes in America are affected by it. With young people, it's the most widely used drug. How do we use this drug? Well, I want to look at an illustration that I call the addiction cycle. And this is a cycle that we go through. When we take alcohol or anything else, we look for comfort, we're looking for some kind of relief, we're looking for a mood change. And that's why we call it mood-altering substances. We want to get high, or we want to get mellow. And basically we're looking to escape reality. And what happens? We get some relief, and then we get withdrawal symptoms when we're not using the substance, and then we're back to the same discomfort at the start of the cycle. So it is a cycle. It's a human condition that we're dealing with called addiction, and alcohol leads to all kinds of problems, more than just the drinking and finding an altered state. It leads to abuse and violence. In the prisons of America today, they estimate that 80% of the people in there were under the influence of alcohol when they committed their crime. So the substance itself is neutral. It's not evil, but it's toxic, and toxic means poisonous. And we have to watch out for it, because what it leads us to is things like cirrhosis of the liver and heart trouble and cancer, and affects our immune system, affects the way our brain works and our pancreas, and it triggers things like hepatitis and malnutrition, pneumonia, and you name it. Almost anything that can happen to hurt the body can be stimulated by using too much alcohol, and also can lead to accidents, and we know that, and murders and suicides. In America today, the leading cause of death is alcohol problems from the ages of 15 to 24. This is where most of our young people are dying and ending up getting impaired. It goes right into the bloodstream through the stomach and intestinal walls. It works fast. It's fairly inexpensive. It sedates us, and yet at the same time it agitates us. It confuses the nervous system, actually. And we have some definitions of alcoholism, and there's not just one definition. The World Health Organization calls it a chronic behavioral disorder. The National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence uses terms like people drinking have a continuing problem in any area of their lives. And the American Medical Association calls it an illness characterized by preoccupation with alcohol and loss of control. To talk a little more about addiction, we use the word, this definition gives you a little bit of clarity on this. It impairs our ability to perform to our full potential. And I love that definition. It's simple and it's clear. If I'm drinking and my ability to function is impaired, I've got a problem. And I have another little illustration to do with Latin, the Latin meaning of the word for addiction. And this is a meaning that ties in with the word devotion. It means to be devoted to in Latin. And the condition of unhealthy dependence is one of the things I want to emphasize. The word dependence means I have to have something in order to function. And having to have something in order to function means that I'm not a free, responsible human being. I need to turn to something else to help me function. And in alcoholism, there are many causes, many factors. There are genetics, and there are behavior problems. We use it as an experiment. We use it for pleasure. We use it to alter our moods. We use it to reduce stress. We use it sometimes to copy other people and keep up with them. You know, the older guys, for example, are setting a model for the younger guys. And we use it as a love object, a love search, and a spiritual quest. And my belief is that all humans are addicted sometimes, and a lot of people are addicted a lot of the time to alcohol. And this brings me to a concept that I'd like to share with you and illustrate this concept. And it uses the initials SAAH. And these initials stand for separation anxiety and attachment hunger. And I believe that all of us start out life in a fairly comfortable place called the womb, and when we're expelled from this womb, we get nervous, and we want to be connected. And then we end up with a lifelong search to be connected and to feel better. And that brings us to attachment hunger. We want to be attached. We want something to make us feel good. And to do this, we discover things like food, we discover alcohol, we discover various drugs, and we turn to them on a habit basis. And what we're really up to, we want to change our feelings. We want to feel good. And that's only natural. So that's another reason why we don't think that the addictions are evil. They just are habits that have gone haywire. And now I'd like to lead you through a series of illustrations that will come one after the other. And we start off with what I call dependence with a capital D. And that's a state of suspense that's very uncomfortable. And it leads us to tension, emotional tension, and physical tension, and emotional and physical pain. And that's what it adds up to, dependence with the capital D. It's unhealthy dependence. And the next item is what I call the big D of addiction. And the big D of addiction, I think I already said the big D of addiction. That's just another way of doing it. Let's move to the OC of addiction. The OC is a critical element. Obsession it means haunted. When I'm obsessed by something like my alcohol, my next drink, I'm haunted by it, and I can't think about anything else. When am I going to have it? What am I going to have? Who am I going to be with? And then the compulsion factor, it means I'm driven. It means I'm actually driven to do something about this situation, this hunger, this appetite that I have. And so that leads me to my next drink. And then all addicts of any kind, regardless of whether it's alcohol or not, exhibit what I call the 5 C's of addiction. And that'll be our next illustration. And the 5 C's of addiction involve craving and compulsion. You know, I need a drink. I don't just want a drink, I need it. And I'm haunted by the idea. And then I only want 1 or 2, but I can lose control and have 5 or 6 or 10. And then what happens? I get sick, I feel awful, I say I'm not going to do this again, but I continue the behavior even though it's damaging my life. How does it damage my life? It damages my life through what I call in the next illustration the PMESS of addiction. It damages me physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. And then we have what I call the DDT and W of addiction. And the DDT and W, very important initials. It stands for such things as defense, defending the behavior. I can handle this. I don't drink that much. Denying the behavior, well, if you had a boss like I have, you'd drink too. Tolerance, building up a tolerance. That means getting to the point where to find the same effect that we used to find, it takes more and more. And eventually we end up getting almost no effect at all except depression. And then withdrawal, a key item in the addictions, especially alcoholism. Withdrawal can lead to seizures and tremors, all kinds of illnesses, can lead to mental problems and hallucinations of all kinds. And then finally, in this brief series, we have what I call the CPF of addiction. It's chronic. It's something that we have over a long period of time. It's progressive. It's a disease that tends to get worse with time, although some people stay in a holding pattern for many years. And then potentially, like the other addictions, it's fatal. Progression is a key item that I want to discuss with you. Progression is different for different people. And so we have all kinds of drinkers, and that's what confuses people. We have people who are binge drinkers, and they only drink every few months. But when they do, they drink almost to the brink of death. We have weekend drinkers who save it up and then do it on the weekend, and they don't think they have a problem. And then we have our daily drinkers who we consider alcoholics, when actually all people who drink too much of the time are alcoholics, whether they do it once a day, once a week, once a month, or once a year even. So we have a lot of different kinds of drinkers. Some of the signs of having a drinking problem: gulping when you're socializing instead of sipping, being afraid your supply is going to run out, decline in wellness and health, a lot of guilt, grandiosity, arrogance, that kind of personality problem that goes with alcoholics. And then isolation, hiding and drinking alone. And then the allergy concept, the allergy that affects the various parts of the body. And then the tolerance that gradually changes. And the lies as alcoholism deepens, lies to oneself, lies to other people. And the building of resentments, in irrational resentments and angers and hatreds against other people, against society itself. And then the physical deterioration, the memory problems, the fear, the moral decline. So we have alcohol in our society as a social lubricant, which may be all right for some people, but for many it isn't. It leads to alcoholism. We use it for so many different reasons. A lot of people use it for medicinal reasons, they believe, and that's the way it is. And moderate drinking should be the goal, but for many people it's not possible. In one study of alcoholics, and a study that helps us break down one of the myths, that you can go back to heavy drinking again or moderate drinking after you've become an alcoholic. They studied 1,289 people very carefully, and only 1.6% were able to go back to moderate drinking after becoming an alcoholic. In other words, for nearly 99% of the population, once you become an alcoholic, you can no longer afford to go back to drinking of any kind. How do you test if you're an alcoholic? Well, you have an alcohol problem. Do you have to control what you do? If you have to control your drinking, that's a sign that you've got a drinking problem. A person who is healthy and a healthy drinker and doesn't need to worry about control. Do you drink alone? Do you crave it? Do you use it to escape? Do you say, I need a drink? Do you use that phrase? Do you say, thank God it's Friday, now I can drink in freedom and not worry if I have a hangover tomorrow? Does it affect your courage? Do you drink for courage? Does it give you guilt or shame? Do you lose track of things? Do you have memory problems because of drinking? Is your performance declining at work or at home or anywhere, or driving your vehicle? Have you had accidents lately? Have you been falling more than usual? If you say yes to almost any of these situations, you need to look at your drinking. Another thing we want to talk about is, and I want to illustrate this, is what I call the ISM of alcoholism. 3 important initials. If you look at an addict carefully, you'll find that a typical addict of any kind, and especially the alcoholic, tends to be basically insecure. And that's why we need that something else to depend on. And then supersensitive. And because the person is supersensitive, they need relief. And then moody. And we all know how moody alcoholics can be. In fact, there have been some people throughout the history of this race that have said they prefer certain people to be under the influence because when they're not drinking, they're so angry and resentful and so difficult to live with. And that's true because they're suffering withdrawal symptoms. So the ISM of addiction stands for insecure, supersensitive, and moody. Alcoholism, what does it lead to? A lot of depression, and a lot of rage, a lot of feelings that escalate and descend, and abstinence. Well, one of the things about abstinence, without a recovery program such as Alcoholics Anonymous, we have to deal in recovering from alcoholism with grief and loss, which is have self-esteem problems, we have anger, we have depression and rage that may surface after years of using alcohol as a sedative. And then we've got to deal with our obsessions and our compulsions that exist in us regardless of whether we drink or not, or whatever our addiction happens to be. And sleep problems often affect recovering alcoholics. So why drink if alcohol causes so much trouble? Well, it's possible to drink moderately, but interestingly enough, even moderate, steady drinking that's not even alcoholic drinking affects the immune system in the human body. And so it is risky to drink on a steady basis, even though our society tolerates it. And I'm not a prohibitionist, but I think drinking should be extremely moderate and not every day, anytime, not every day, not for medicine. I think that leads to addiction. So it's legal, but it's not safe. And a friend of mine who used to be in the White House, her name was Gail Healy, who was the president's liaison for alcohol issues, used to use this quotation, it's legal but not safe, and anyone is susceptible to alcoholism. And she also told me that 40 to 60% of the hospital beds in America are filled with misdiagnosed alcoholics. So alcoholism is a major problem in our society. We think it's a disease, and we think of it as a many-factored problem. It's not simple, it's complicated. And I want to run through some of these issues now. We have what I call some factors to remember about alcohol addiction. And these factors are that there's an allergy factor. It affects our bodies, and it alters our energy. And then there's sensitivity that may be physical and may be emotional. And then there's what I call a disposition. And this might be that some people are more disposed to alcoholism than others through heredity or through family influences. And then there is the tendency to maybe overdo things or be an extremist. And that's how alcoholics are. These are some of the factors. And then we have some recovery realities, because this is a disease that I call a disease of hope. And in recovery, a human being can learn to move away from the habits that were destructive, change their way of thinking about the world, change the words they use, those anger-filled words, and you start to use words of love and concern for others, and change the actions, those compulsive, obsessive actions, and then change the reactions, those negative reactions to life. So an alcoholic actually has to learn to restructure a whole life pattern, and it's an amazing process. What we're talking about is a process that often requires medical care, especially in severe alcoholism. So we have it available to us today. Thank God. We have it with doctors and clinics and hospitals that understand this problem. And then we have psychological help. Even after the physical part of the disease seems to be healing, we then have to deal with the mind, which is at the root of the addictions, the way we think. And that can be a lifelong process, learning to heal whatever wounds we have from early childhood or other trauma we've experienced. And then there's the religious aspect of the spiritual, which is a necessary element in a human being's growth toward their fulfillment and their future destiny after this life, wherever that takes them. And so we have self-help groups that have emerged to help people with this. And interestingly enough, AA has turned out the cheapest self-help group, the cheapest therapy known to mankind, has probably helped more people to recover from alcoholism than any other treatment that was ever devised. And what AA and other groups do is help people learn to be responsible human beings. An alcoholic, once addicted, remains a person with a tendency to become addicted again if he or she goes back to the behavior. But it doesn't remove the responsibility. An individual who drinks too much and causes problems to himself, herself, other people, needs to be responsible, and that's a requirement. And they're responsible for what? To get treatment, to get their disease treated. And they're responsible for changing their own attitudes about life. And sometimes to help them do that, the court system will actually pressure a person into treatment, and sometimes a spouse will do the same thing, and that can be good. That can motivate a person. Although ultimately we need an inner change in a human being to change an addiction process. We have to have a turning point, a moment of truth inside the person. And one of my favorite people in the alcohol field was Dr. Stanley Gitlow down in New York at Mount Sinai Hospital, and I heard him talk about this subject in great depth. And he feels, and I feel, that another very useful definition of addiction, and especially alcohol addiction, is any technique for coping with the problems of life other than interpersonal relating. So what we're doing is we're substituting for relating when we turn to the bottle, when we turn to the drink. We're not dealing with our feelings, with our inner truth, with our thoughts, with our reality. We're substituting and we're not growing. And many people who become alcoholic in their teens are still teenagers when they're 40 and 50 years old. They have to go back and start life over again and go through the stages of development. So it's a problem of relating. It's a substitute for relating. And actually, Dr. Gitlow said it was an inability to relate. And that's why a lot of alcoholics isolate. They go in their room and they watch television and they eat munchies and they drink booze and they think they're living, and actually they're dying. They're dying very slowly. And one of the things they're doing is going back to old behaviors, old ways of dealing with pain and frustration and conflict and difficulties in relating to other people. So one of the challenges that Dr. Gitlow has emphasized is the isolation has to be changed. He calls it fracturing the isolation. That's the use of something like AA. A person comes out of the isolation into a group of other people who have the same problem and understand the disease, and then this person learns to relate to other people, learns to recognize feelings and fears and frustrations, learns to share feelings instead of stuffing them and having them build up into huge resentments. And then this person also may decide on getting therapy to get some insights into areas in which all of us at some time get stuck in our emotional growth, and we need help from other people. And then the question of relapse is a major item, and unfortunately, relapse can be traced to a lack of therapy most of the time. In most cases, if a person continues to go to a self-help group like AA and goes to a certain healthy number of meetings a week, not an exact number, it's different for different people, but if a pattern is developed, that's like medicine. And if that pattern changes, there's a high risk of the person going back to the disease. Because what happens is their mindset changes. They start thinking unhealthy thoughts, and they get immersed in negativity and isolation, and they move back to the relief. And where's the relief? In the old days, it came from drinking, so they go back to the drinking. And that's how the process works. Dr. Gitlow's recommendations: go to meetings. Number one, go to meetings. AA meetings, other self-help meetings, meetings with therapists. Number two, never miss a meeting. Number three, arrive first. Number four, sit in the first row and listen. Number 5, say something to somebody, even if it's just hi to the person sitting next to you. Introduce yourself. That's number 6. Introduce yourself to other people. And then number 7, volunteer to be part of the group. Do something. You know, put chairs away, sweep the floor. Do something as a useful human being. Be responsible. And then number 8, he suggests that people go to meetings of self-help groups. Stay for coffee. Stay afterwards. Talk to people. Make friends. Then number 9, leave last. Of course, we all can't leave last, but leave late. And stay with other people and maybe go out for coffee afterwards. Learn to break your isolation. And then number 10, he said, never leave an AA meeting or another self-help group meeting alone. It's a place to make friends and become friends. And how long, the question is, how long do I have to do this? How long do I have to go to self-help groups? The answer, until you like it. And once you like it, you no longer will have to ask, how long do I have to do this? And that's the way self-help recovery works. It's very mysterious, and yet it's very simple. By going to meetings, we change our behavior, we break our isolation. We no longer have the same kind of pain that we need to drive us into the drink. And so I want to move toward the end of this discussion with looking at a couple of other illustrations. And one of them, the first one I call the key to recovery. The key to recovery. And the key to recovery, it's the healing of the human spirit. That's what I want to call the key to recovery. And it takes time. There's no quick fix. There's no quick healing. What we need to do is recover gradually. And basically, I guess I would go back to some of the founders of the Alcoholics Anonymous movement had some simple slogans like trust God, clean house, and help others. And that's what gets people on the road to health. Physically, mentally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually. And basically what we're talking about in recovery from alcoholism is find a safe place to recover. Do it with kindred spirits that understand your situation. Learn what unconditional love is, and take advantage of the healing that's available everywhere in this country and around the world for alcohol problems. So thank you very much for letting me share with you some of these insights on alcohol addiction.